Hello, friends, and welcome back. This is Adrienne Balkum. Thanks for spending part of your day with me. I hope you're having a wonderful week. Before we jump into today's feature story, I wanted to share a few updates from around Rockwall County. First, a quick update on the court petition that we've been following between Brian McNeal and Dennis London. On Monday, June 29th, there was a status hearing, and the court has now scheduled a hearing for July 15th at 1 p.m. I'll continue following the case and will keep you updated as new information becomes available. I also want to congratulate a new local author. Daniel Lewis has released a new tween and teen adventure titled Rowan and the Lost Treasure, a map, a mystery, and the adventure that changed everything. I always enjoy seeing local authors pursuing their creative passions, and I hope you'll take a moment to check out his work and support another member of our community. The book is currently available for purchase on Amazon, and I'm going to put in the description the link to it. So look out for that. As we head into the holiday weekend, don't forget about the Independence Day festivities happening across Rockwall County. Be sure to check out the City of Heath Independence Day Parade. It begins at 9 a.m. and it's followed by this grand opening of Town Center Park that should start at 10 a.m. It's shaping up to be a great morning for families. So if you're looking to celebrate somewhere, be sure to add that one to your calendar. I like to give a quick shout out to Chris Curtis and the Rockwall ISD sports marketing team. Chris should be returning from vacation to find one of the district's athletic facilities sporting a brand new scoreboard. It's been a long time coming and is just one of roughly 50 capital improvement summer projects taking place across Rockwall ISD before students return to campus. Believe it or not, football season isn't that far away. Before long, Friday night lights will be back. Marching bands will be warming up, and that familiar excitement of a new school year will be here once again. Something that I have been watching closely is one item that I will be following up on in the next coming weeks. On June 23rd, the Rockwall County Commissioners Court unanimously authorized legal counsel to negotiate and prepare a settlement agreement and development agreement involving DR Horton and River Rock Development. The details haven't really been talked about publicly, so I hope to see something finalized very soon. But either way, I am certainly going to be watching that very closely. Now, let's turn to today's story. I watched the June 29th Fate City Council meeting where council members faced an important decision: appoint someone to fill the vacant place one council seat, or allow voters to decide in the November election. 9 residents stepped forward and volunteered to serve: Benjamin Sumrak, Stephanie Adams, Bob Chambers, Lorna Grove, Aaron Kirkpatrick, Lauren Megacy, Joshua Martin, Brad Scott, and Michael Wright. By the end of the evening, no appointment had been made, but before we get to the vote, I want to focus on something that stood out during the interviews: the questions. Some of the questions went straight to the heart of governing. Candidates were asked about the upcoming city budget, which is one of the biggest responsibilities the council will face between now and November. Another question asked applicants to describe a time when they worked through obstacles, policies, or procedures to accomplish a goal. Those are governing questions. They open the door for candidates to talk about budgeting, priorities, leadership, problem solving, and long term planning, the very work a council member would begin almost immediately if appointed. Other questions explored different territory. Candidates were asked whether they had previously been appointed to a council vacancy. They were asked why they had not filed during the May election. And they were asked what they liked most about the City of Fate. As I listened, I kept coming back to the actual role of a city council member. A council member is not just attending meetings, they're helping set policy, adopt a budget, oversee public resources, and plan for a growing community. So it raises an important question. When interviewing someone for public office, what questions best help citizens understand whether that person is prepared to govern? One of the most relevant questions of the evening came from Councilmember Alan Robbins. He asked candidates to think about the responsibility they would inherit almost immediately if appointed. helping prepare the city's upcoming budget while balancing the needs of a rapidly growing community. As you listen to these responses, I want you to listen for more than just the words. What priorities do they identify? What challenges do they recognize? And how do they think about spending taxpayer dollars? Let's begin with Benjamin Sumrak.
Outside of looking at it and having limited time to prepare for this, I would say that you've always got to start off and looking at your police and fire, keeping the safety of the cities at the top of the list. And with the growth that Fate is experiencing right now, are we appropriately staffing police and fire? Do they have the resources they need, equipment, training, budget? Are we keeping their salaries competitive so that we can attract the best possible people in those areas? But it doesn't stay with just police and fire. You have to look at all of your city services. You can talk about, are we putting enough infrastructure in for water supply to keep up this growth? Because that all takes long-term planning to build that infrastructure. So those would be the top of my concerns. Low taxes are the way to go. And then having proper zoning in place so that you're building a healthy tax base so that tax burden is spread out across both residents and the commercial aspect of it so that neither entity on either side of that coin truly feels the pain of those taxes. And I do want to point out again, there are some things that only city government can do, such as those city services. While taxes are necessary, you do have to make sure you're putting things in place to be good steward of those funds.
One thing I immediately noticed was that Benjamin didn't begin by talking about lowering taxes. He began with public safety, police, fire, infrastructure. Then he worked backwards into taxes. In other words, he was thinking about what the city is responsible for and providing first, and then how you pay for it. Let's hear how Stephanie Adams answered the same question.
When I think of city services, I believe the most critical priorities are public safety, fire protection, infrastructure, customer service to our residents, and making sure the city has operational capacity to keep up with growth. As Fate continues to grow, residents expect safe neighborhoods, reliable roads, responsive city services, and facilities that can support the community, not just today, but 5, 10, and 20 years from now. My approach would be to prioritize essential services, maintain healthy reserves, look for efficiencies, and evaluate projects based on long term value. I also believe residents deserve transparent conversations about major investments so they understand both the cost and the benefits.
Stephanie approached the question from a slightly different angle. She wasn't just talking about next year's budget, she was talking about decisions that affect the city 5, 10, and even 20 years from now. She also brought up something I don't think citizens hear often enough: transparent conversations about major investments. Then Councilmember Alan Robbins asked a follow up question about tax philosophy.
What's your philosophy on setting a tax rate that supports strong city services for a growing community?
My philosophy is that taxpayers deserve both responsible stewardship of their tax dollars and city services that keep up with the needs of a growing community. Because of my experience as a trustee, I understand the importance of growth, planning for future needs, and making decisions that directly impact taxpayers. I do not believe the tax rate should be looked at in isolation. It has to be considered alongside other factors, including the city's overall financial condition, growth, public safety, fire protection, infrastructure needs, and the level of service residents expect. Fate also has some unique challenges. We have two school districts, multiple MUDs, districts, PIDs, and different layers of taxation.
I thought Stephanie made an interesting observation there. She reminded everyone that a tax rate doesn't exist in a vacuum. It connected to growth, infrastructure, public safety, and even the unique way different neighborhoods and fate are taxed. Next came Bob Chambers. By this point in the interviews, I started noticing a pattern. Different applicants, different backgrounds, yet many of them kept returning to the same priority: public safety. Here's Bob Chambers.
So I think the most critical city service is public safety. We are rapidly growing. When I moved here 9 years ago, The city was less than 20,000 and now it's more than 30,000. We need to keep up with the population growth, particularly I think in the fire department. Saw some the other day about we have 4 firefighters on duty at any one time, which is not enough to fight a reasonably sized house fire. So we need to continue to grow city sales tax revenue, property tax revenue. Um, as far as funding services, we just need to make sure that the city growth continues so that we can support those activities, those functions.
Bob's answer also highlighted something communities eventually face as they grow. Growth doesn't just bring more rooftops, it also increases demand for city services. That means today's budget decisions often determine tomorrow's capacity. Lorna Grove approached that conversation from another perspective. What I appreciated about Lorna's response was that she didn't begin with numbers. She began with listening. Before deciding where improvements are needed, she said she wanted to hear from the people actually doing the work. Here's Lorna Grove.
The city's most important responsibilities are the services people count on every day. Public safety has to come first. So making sure our police officers, our firefighters have what they need is essential. Reliable water, good roads, and solid infrastructure are just as critical in our growing community. As for areas where we're lacking, I'm not sure that we're lacking anywhere, but I think it's where we can improve. I want to understand the challenges and hear actually from the people doing the work. Listening first is important. One of my hopes for Fate is that it remains the kind of community where my grandbabies can afford to buy a home and live just down the road from me. I want them to enjoy safe neighborhoods, dependable services, and roads that are well built and well maintained. The decisions we make today will shape the city that they inherit. To me, good budgeting means balancing today's needs with tomorrow's. We have to maintain excellent services now while making smart investments to prepare the city for the future. Every dollar we spend should make Freight stronger, not just for today, but for the next generations to come.
Lorna also introduced another idea we hadn't heard yet: legacy. She talked about the kind of city future generations will inherit. That's another way of thinking about a budget, not just balancing next year's numbers, but asking what kind of community today's decisions are creating. Brad Scott organized his answers around 3 priorities. As you listen, notice that his third point wasn't about money, it was about trust.
I think top 3 priorities first is maintaining excellent public safety while managing growth. I will admit that I have a couple firefighters in the family. I have an uncle and a cousin who are fire chief. And I do think it's very important that that group is, as well as any first responders, whether it be the police or the sewage water companies, that we make sure that we don't underfund those particular populations of team members. But I do think that underfunding those particular avenues would be a mistake. Second, expanding commercial tax base. I really would focus more on the I-30 corridor. With the expansion of I-30, and specifically from the state, there's a lot of opportunity there. And when you think about the on-ramps and the off-ramps and where particular commercial businesses are placed, I understand we don't have a lot of decisions in what gets placed there. However, that is a big opportunity to take the burden off of the families of the city. And then thirdly, kind of a little bit of the elephant we're in is making sure we build the trust back to the families in this community. I don't have an opinion necessarily on how things are going, but the reality is that there is a large silent majority that's concerned about what this council is able to execute with their communication as well as their partnership. So my hope would be to come in here, make sure that I'm collaborating with all of you, making sure that I'm listening, asking the right appropriate questions, and being fair and honest with each of you.
Before we move on, I do want to mention that for the sake of time, I wasn't able to include every interview in today's episode. All 9 applicants volunteered to serve, and I want to recognize each of them for stepping forward. If you'd like to hear every interview, I encourage you to watch the full city council meeting. As I listened to the interviews, one thing really stood out. Although each applicant came from a different background and brought different life experiences, many of them kept returning to the same priorities: public safety, infrastructure, managing growth, financial stewardship, planning for the future. That tells me the conversation wasn't centered around personalities, it was centered on governing. I also want to recognize Councilmember Ashley Rains and Councilmember Alan Robbins. Their questions invited applicants to explain how they think about governing, not just what they believe. Those questions gave residents an opportunity to hear how each candidate approaching the budget, leadership, priorities, and long-term planning. But another part of the interviews caught my attention. It wasn't about the budget. It was about public service itself. Several applicants were asked why they hadn't filed for the May election and whether they would consider running if appointed. What I found interesting wasn't necessarily their individual answers, it was the common thread running through them. Several applicants spoke openly about today's political climate. Some mentioned social media, others talked about division. Several questioned whether now was the right time to step into public service. That left me thinking about something much bigger than one vacant council seat. What happens when good people decide public service simply isn't worth it? They gave residents an opportunity to hear how each applicant approached those responsibilities before anyone casted a vote. Other questions explored different topics, including whether someone had previously been appointed, why they hadn't filed during the May election, and whether they intended to run again in November. Those questions certainly added context, but they also left me with one final question. Which questions help us better understand how someone will govern? I'll let you think about that. Following the meeting, former Mayor Lauren Megacy shared his thoughts on social media after also participating in the interview process himself. Whether you agreed with his perspective or not, he reminded people of something that's easy to overlook. Serving on a city council isn't just attending meetings, it's preparing for budget workshops, learning state law, reviewing financial reports, meeting with department heads, reading hundreds of pages of agenda material, and making decisions that affect an entire community. It's a much bigger commitment than many people realize. Listening to the applicants reminded me that local government works best when people are willing to step forward. Not because they're seeking recognition, but because they're genuinely wanting to serve their neighbors. Our country's founders envisioned representative government as public service. Citizens would step forward, contribute their time and talents, make difficult decisions on behalf of their communities, and then return to their everyday lives. It wasn't intended to be about status or personal ambition. It was about stewardship. So I want to say thank you to every person who submitted an application for this appointment. I don't know if anybody else thanked you, but I want to thank you. I don't live in your city, but I wanted to let you know, thank you for submitting an application. Whether you had served before, whether this was your first time stepping into the public arena, that takes courage. Putting your name forward, answering questions in a public meeting, and opening yourself up to public scrutiny isn't easy. If you weren't selected this time, I sincerely hope you'll continue looking for ways to serve. Communities need people who are willing to participate. They need thoughtful people, people who ask questions, people who listen, people who care enough to get involved. Ultimately, the council reached a deadlock and the decision now moves to the voters. Maybe that's exactly where the decision belongs. Now the community will have an opportunity to hear from the candidates, ask questions, and ultimately decide who they want representing them. Before I let you go, I wanted to share something that happened this morning. In my last episode, I mentioned that I had contacted the city of McLendon-Chisholm regarding the 2026 city citizen survey or city survey. Historically, those survey results are normally shared publicly, usually on the website. This time, I was told I would need to submit a public information request. Well, at approximately 10 o'clock this morning, the city published the 2026 Citizen Satisfaction Survey on the website. Was my question the reason? I honestly don't know. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who enjoys learning more about what's happening here in Rockwall County. Sometimes the biggest victories aren't dramatic. Sometimes they're as simple as public information becoming easier for everyone to access. That's a win for the community. I'm Adrienne Balkum. Thanks for listening.